deeper introduction, some strategies that we've shared to build trust, some specific examples from each of our work, and then I think we have some time for questions. So, Kristen, I'm going to turn it over to you to tell people a little more about yourself.
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Hughes Evans. I'm a University of Maryland and University College of Dublin graduate, and have been working with farmers for about almost 25 years now. And I just want to give a shout out that there's a lot of folks on this call who have deep experience working with farmers. So the question and answer period should be really fun. Anyways, Jen?
Okay, thanks. Okay. Okay, there we go. So yeah, I'm Jen Nelson. I have a few hats that I wear. I work with the conservation districts in Delaware and in Maryland. And I also serve as the coordinator for the Chesapeake Bay Programs Advisory Committee. And I think I wanted to start by saying that I am from Prince George's County in Maryland, so adjacent to DC for those who aren't familiar, which is not a heavily agricultural area or known to be. And I don't have an agricultural background. So I have a bachelor's in environmental science from Rutgers in New Jersey. And I worked on an urban farm for the summers a few years in college. And my family took bets as to whether or not I was going to last as a farm worker over the summer, if I would make it to work in time to be there at 6 a.m. But that experience in my senior year, I became certified as a nutrient management planner to write the plan for that farm. And that experience gave me a little bit of a foot in the door to work with the Chesapeake Bay program after that as one of their staffers with the modeling subcommittee. And then with one of our conservation districts here in Delaware, where I live now. So I've worked for a state agency here in Delaware, as well as NRCS. So I kind of worked a little bit with everybody, a lot of the key partners in that conservation space, and became a private contractor in 2013, where I started serving on the roles that I described earlier there. So I think it's important to kind of understand where we're coming from. You know, it's a different experience, I think, for people who have a background in agriculture or, come from a farming family, as opposed to people who are entering in that space and are just interested in helping farmers.
Yeah, and I'll just add, Jen, I feel like I'm a great person to talk about this because I've worked for environmental organizations for most of my professional career, and I now live in the capital of Virginia where the regulations are passed that farmers have to deal with. So if anybody can work with farmers. If I can work with farmers, anybody can work with farmers with some few basic, approaches.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. I think sometimes I've kind of described it as I had nowhere to go but up. So yeah. All right. So Kristen, do you want to start on this one and I can chime in, or do you want me to take this one?
Um, Let me just give some, I'm going to start at the bottom if that's okay. The listening part, I think the important thing when we first meet a farmer is to really try to understand what their concerns are. And Libby Norris is one of my most favorite colleagues. She passed away about 10 years ago, and I loved hearing her talk about how she worked with farmers. And she would say, she didn't walk onto a farm and talk about, well, here's my needs, here's what I want you to do. She would walk on a farm and say, well, what are your concerns? Like, what challenges are you dealing with as you move your herd from one pasture to another? And her whole focus was let's design a conservation practice that will make your life easier, that will help you raise healthier cattle and maybe save you some time. So seek to seek to understand before you seek to be understood is a really important component here. And then the other part that I'll touch on, and then Jen, you can take over, is the just being respectful, respecting like the window of time that farmers have. They're some of the busiest people that we know. And there's times of the year where we really try not to bother them at all because they're prioritizing planting their crops or harvesting their crops. And so being understanding of what's going on in the cycle of farming, I think is really helpful, as well as understanding what's happening in the economic, with the economic situation overall. Like we can't know the specifics of a farm before we meet the farmer, but we can certainly understand, wow, like corn and soybean prices are a challenge this year. So let's be respectful of that when we start a conversation. Jen?
Yeah. I I agree with that. And there was some point probably when I was working as a watershed coordinator with NRCS, that I came to understand that the farmers that I worked with in that role were really interested in conservation, but I had to understand that it was kind of one piece of their pie, right? You know, as a watershed coordinator, it was my entire pie. And I think just kind of helping to be appreciative of the context that my work was sort of fitting into their whole work was helpful for me to understand. And so I think I'll take the top there then with the right message and the right messenger. So we have their partner with a trusted advisor. So that um, is kind of a good way to get an in if you're getting started in an agricultural community and trying to figure out like how you can start to work with somebody. Particularly, you know, as we mentioned, not being particularly from an ag background, like, and with the experience that I've had, not as a technical advisor for the past 20 years or so, I understand that I'm actually not one of those trusted advisors to be advising somebody directly on how they should manage their operation. But what I can do is I can connect them with the people that are trusted advisors, people that they'll listen to and sort of take guidance from. A lot of times that's another farmer. Farmers really like to hear from other farmers. And sometimes that is an ag retailer, the people that they're working with in that space. It can be extension, it can be the conservation districts, of course. So, you know, it depends on the person and it depends on the thing that they're seeking advice on. But I think that that's kind of a good strategy, seeking an introduction or kind of working with finding those common goals and objectives with another person that's already embedded in that community is a really good way to get started.
Yeah, and as a employee of an environmental organization, I have to counter the defensiveness that can come when farmers, you know, understand where I'm coming from and when I'm first meeting there. I mean, in fairness, there are some environmental organizations that, or some folks in the environmental community that don't like certain farms and would rather them radically change their operations. And everybody's entitled to their opinion, but that means when any environmental member, a community member walks on a farm, we have to kind of, you know, clarify, like, are we trying to put you out of business? Are we trying to pass regulations that you hate? So you kind of have to like talk about who you are, who you've worked with, and be really honest about what you're hoping for. And I can give a specific example of this later. But I would also want to kind of come back to the bottom about being honest about, you know, not just being your authentic self, but also being honest about, well, what are the pros and cons of participating in whatever project that we're talking about, whatever conservation practice, and really trying to avoid coming across like we're selling something because we need farmers to be successful. We need food. So we want to give them information that they need to make the best decision for their operation. And if, you know, everything goes well, that means the conservation practices that we want are happening as well, because so many of them are also good for the farm's bottom line.
Mm-hmm. I think that's exactly right.
So I just want to give an example here of like one of my very first experiences building bridges with farmers. I was right out of grad school and I got sent to a dairy producer organization in California in the San Joaquin Valley. And it was a very conservative dairy producer organization that had really no relationship with environmentalists. So I was sitting at their board meeting and it was my turn to talk. And I said, look, I know you guys probably want to throw your forks at me. And they were like forks, knives. I mean, I was coming from an environmental organization at that time that was based in San Francisco, like could not be more suspect. And I said, okay, I get it, but we drink milk. We're grateful to you for producing it, and we want you to be successful. And we want to find conservation solutions that work for your farms. And that they'd never heard an environmentalist say that. So that's a good example of like, you know, having to like state your position of like, I'm not trying to put you out of business. I want you to thrive in your business. I want you to be successful. I want you to be able to pay your employees and take care of your families and live a good life. That is actually like the position I start at when I first talk with a farmer, being from the environmental community. Not everybody has to start at such a low basic level. But I think I just want to acknowledge that.
I think that's great. Kristen, I have a question in the interim here. Since I started, a couple decades ago in doing some of this work. Do you think that environmental groups have kind of gotten better at talking to farmers and finding that common message?
I would like to hear the answer from the farming community, but I would hope so. I think so. Um,
Okay.
and I think as the relationships get built, like one relationship can bridge to another and to another. And so this very conservative dairy producer organization that I mentioned in the San Joaquin Valley was one of our strongest champions for conservation practices. And there are tens of thousands of acres in no-till production and dairy forage crops in California because of this organization's leadership. These farmers needed to know that they were partnering with somebody who was on their side, not who was going to use whatever information they told them to attack them or to undermine their operations.
I think that's really important. You're up again.
So the other thing I wanted to share with you is something we've been doing over the past 3 years called the Virginia Innovation Roundtable. And it's really relevant to this because through this effort, we're able to position farmers as leading voices for conservation. And it started a few years ago when our board was like, we got to find a way to reward these innovative farmers we're working with. And so when we asked our farm partners, like, what would you guys want and need? What we heard from them, and these are guys that are in like the top 1% and 2% of like the technology innovation curve. I mean, they're like the kind of people that are like waiting in line overnight for like the latest, Apple product or whatever. I mean, they're just incredible thinkers, really smart folks, constantly trying to solve problems. And they wanted to connect with other people who were thinking like them. One of my friends, farmer named Rob Hinton, was like, I don't have anyone around here to talk to. Nobody is interested in what I'm doing. So we brought together farmers like this from across Virginia in the Innovation Roundtable. And not only have we created a safe space for them to learn from each other, to creatively problem solve, but these farmers are now leading efforts through the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Mary Sketch Bryant is on the call, I see, and they're just incredible spokespeople and peer-to-peer mentors and educators for other farmers in Virginia. So it's really kind of a train the trainer approach. And the other thing I want to mention is that these are the farmers that we can go to with a sticky problem, and they will have sometimes really good ideas that, as someone from the environmental community, as a nonprofit, we're in a position to help fund. So, really partnering with farmers in this respect is really going to the leading farmers and positioning them to lead their peers. And we are hoping to expand this effort into Delaware and Maryland in 2026.
That's exciting. So working in Delaware and Maryland, I am happy to hear that. So, and I can think of farmers that I work with that are like the one that you described. Um, he's kind of leading edge, likes to try lots of things, and it can be a little difficult sometimes to be like that crazy person in your area and not have, other people that you can exchange information with or knowledge or like kind of spitball ideas and things like that. So I think that this is a great model to connect people and kind of like help them into that leadership role. Okay. So I guess I'll take kind of a different side of this building trust question. So one of the roles that I serve is as the coordinator for the Chesapeake Bay Program's Ag Advisory Committee, which was established, got going this year, and joined three other kind of long established advisory committees that work with the Bay Program. And so the three other ones that are that had previously been in existence have kind of a long record, are really mature, include the STAC, the Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee, the Local Governments Advisory Committee, and Stakeholders Advisory Committees. So I think coming around into this next iteration of the Chesapeake Bay Agreement, there was a recognition that farmers have a responsibility still for about 50% of the remaining load, which is a lot for one sector, that relies on the individual contributions and decision making for those stakeholders throughout the watershed. And so the formation of this new advisory committee recognized how important it was to hear from farmers and to be able to kind of speak into policy and strategies at the Bay program level to advise on which kind of initiatives would be most successful, most resonant with the ag community, and kind of the most feasible for them to adopt. So when they came on board, or with them coming on board, they want recognition that farmers aren't opponents of the Chesapeake restoration effort, that they are key partners in that effort. And so, when the draft agreement was going through its revisions, they wanted agriculture kind of called out and named in that agreement to recognize that the success of the restoration effort was in a large part dependent on that partnership. And so another thing that they wanted to put forward was really that the success of the restoration effort depends on the success and viability of the individual farms within the watershed as well. So having that focus on economic viability kind of as a key priority in those strategies to restore the bay was vital for that success. So where I think in the past, sometimes we've developed strategies that did no harm to agriculture, or kind of had economic viability as sort of a secondary consideration. To the Ag Advisory Committee, like, they're really putting it forward as a priority that viability piece needs to be co-equal in the restoration in order for that to be successful. So the Ag Advisory Committee, it's important for this call and this audience to recognize that they're figuring this to be a two-way street with key partners. So the farmers on the advisory committee definitely provide their insight and perspective to the Bay program, but they're also looking to have kind of a, to share that information out into their own networks and to hear from other stakeholders, to get ideas and things like that, to have that be a collaborative position in working with everybody that's kind of interested in helping conservation and to move their contribution forward. So they have a few priorities that they've established for at least the next year. So with them being kind of new in town, one of the things that they want to do is understand the model and how agriculture is represented in the model. So that they are working with their state reps on the ag work group and the ag modeling team to understand where the sticky issues are and where there are challenges in modeling agriculture. They're working to help identify more current and accurate sources of data where that's available, and they want to ensure that the community is receiving credit for the effort that they're doing already. They're also looking to identify strategies with the highest potential. So new technologies that have the greatest potential to impact water quality, and to provide some guidance from their perspective on how those strategies can be moved forward. And they're also looking to focus on profitability as opposed to focus on yield. So right now, in a lot of spaces, that yield potential is kind of top of conversation, but they're looking to shift that focus a little bit so that they're helping farmers be as profitable as they can be, not as necessarily productive as they can be. And I think that's it for slides, which leaves us plenty of time for questions and answers.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen and Kristen, for setting the stage for this conversation. I'm glad that we have so much extra time for questions because we got a bunch from our registrants and folks online. If you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll be looking at the chat and the questions in advance as we move forward. So here's one to kick things off. And that involves some of the cost share programs that are available to farmers to participate in that would help them with some of the costs of implementing some of these practices and making changes to their operations. But a lot of them are reimbursement programs and require some upfront investment from the farmers, which can cause a little bit of hesitancy just because of that upfront cost. So the question was, with that context, are the programs working? Are we seeing the results? And are there other programs or resources that could help farmers with those upfront costs so that they can engage in some of these cost share programs?
I'll start off. I stayed unmuted. And so I think for part of that question, I would say that the cost share programs that we've had have been pretty successful. Like they've helped a lot of farmers put in a lot of practices, make a lot of changes in their management. And to the degree where some projects are particularly expensive with some of those manure handling technologies, especially, I think that it's a little bit of a complicated question. I think that some government entities, may be a little bit shy about fronting the costs, kind of not knowing for sure, if somebody doesn't have skin in the game that they're going to follow through on implementing a practice, because people do drop out of cost share programs for lots of reasons a lot of times, like the timing doesn't work out, the budget doesn't work out, because there's still cost share programs, like so somebody has to have the funds to cover that, as well as say they're 25% or whatever, and sometimes the way farm economics go right now, that can be a challenge. I will say that that's a good space potentially for partners to step in and help with that. And also this, I don't have a ton of familiarity with, but I believe that the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP program, does have an advanced payment option for new and beginning farmers and socially disadvantaged farmers. So if you're working with somebody, I think that that's worth looking into. I'm not sure the status of that right now, but I understand that that's an option that's out there.
And I'll just add, like, farmers, this is how they operate, right? Like they have to buy seed and fertilizer well before they know what price they're going to get for their crops. So and there are some low interest loan programs that can help cover the initial costs.
Great, thank you. And a question came in the chat. Can you talk a little bit more about the more current or accurate data needs? What kind of data are you referring to, and how could it be used to find solutions?
Okay. Yeah, I am kind of happy to start with that one. For the Ag Advisory Committee, they're learning about the data sources that are currently being utilized in the model, particularly when it comes to nutrients, fertilizer applications, crop yields, and what the landscapes look like. So they have familiarity themselves with where they report information. So they have a sense, say, of how reliable the Census of Agriculture is versus Farm Service Agency data versus where they report different things, and kind of like have a sense among the ag community for which of those data sources are likely to be most reliable. So I think sometimes I think we rely a lot on the ag census right now. So they would kind of speak into whether or not some of the other places that they report data, whether it's to their state, whether it's Farm Service Agency or something, might be an alternative source to look at.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll just add is, like, we know yields are going up, but we also know that our farmers are some of the most conservation-minded farmers potentially in the world, definitely in the US. And what we don't always know is all the practices that are going on the farm to improve nutrient use efficiency. There's been a lot of effort in this, a lot of educational effort, a lot of really good nonprofits working on this. The 4R Alliance is really leading in this work. And our land grant university folks have been talking about it for probably decades now. So we don't always know exactly how much fertilizer is getting put down. So we have to estimate. So even something as basic as, like, well, how much fertilizer is being used to grow crops in this county? It would be nice if we had better information.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that BMP verification piece is a really good one.
Great, thank you. And so sort of building off of that, where do you see, either from your experience or just, from your knowledge of BMP implementation in general, where are those crossover points that pair those best management conservation practices that are really effective along with those that offer a good benefit to the farmers? Are there any sort of tried and true practices that are the go-tos?
There are so many. Like, and I know people in the chat can chime in here too. I'm looking at you, Rob. But like soil health is a great one. I mean, we've been taught before soil health was a thing, agronomists were talking about things like soil fertility and tilth. And now we are really seeing the benefits of our no-till systems, our cover crop systems, and everything farmers are doing to protect soil health, to increase diversity of plants that are in the soil, to increase the microbial community in the soil. That's helping them weather droughts. It's helping them weather rainstorms. It's new, research coming out of our land grant universities is suggesting that it has potential to significantly reduce inputs of commercial fertilizer because we are increasing the soil organic carbon. We're bringing in carbon from our cover cropping systems. And I think the latest research out of Penn State in their field trials showed that when they use their improved calculator, and this is Charlie White's work, they were able to reduce nitrogen on an average of 43 pounds per acre. This would be out-of-pocket costs the farmer is now avoiding. So that's somewhere, I don't know the exact price of nitrogen now, but I mean, that's at least $30 an acre in savings with, you know, no yield change. That's incredible. So that's just one example.
I 100% agree on soil health improving practices. And I think I would also include, you touched on how soil health can improve nutrient use efficiency in and of itself. And I think kind of the expanding on that part of it, where I've worked with a lot of farmers that are kind of working on practices for our nutrient management practices to increase that efficiency in precision agriculture. So I think kind of that those kind of management and analysis strategies that give people that opportunity to really lock in or dial in on the right rate for their field, for their yield goals and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of potential there still too.
Great. Thank you for that. And so another comment and question that we received ahead of time said that there's, this working assumption around agriculture and its pollutant loads that they're deriving from excessive amounts of nutrients being applied by the farmers. And so can we take an opportunity to address that assumption? Is it correct? I'm sure there's a lot of nuances in there, but what is, if we unpacked that a little bit for those unfamiliar with sort of the nutrient contributions coming from agriculture, what are the real culprits and things that we need to watch out for?
Do you want me to start on that, Jen?
Sure.
First of all, the language, like the suggestion that farmers are just out there like over applying fertilizer is offensive. That if we come in the door with that, that's very offensive. Farmers are making the best decisions they can for their bottom line, and the hard thing is that asking a farmer to fertilize for an average yield, right, means that they might sacrifice one of the best yields, in the 10-year history. So there is a natural tension there between wanting to not just grow an average yield, but to grow a good yield. It's going to give you some extra money to take your family on vacation and balancing that without wasting fertilizer. So there's a lot of new tools out there that are helping farmers be more precise with fertilizer. The other thing I want to come back to with language is that there is a footprint for growing food for people. So I think even when we use a term like agriculture, that implies like there's some big industry out there. And no, these are individual small businesses producing food. So I actually like to say food production better because it kind of makes it like this is a we problem. We are not going to feed this many people without having an environmental footprint. So we have to be careful with our language. And again, we have to understand where the farmer's coming from and do what we can to bring them tools that are practical for them to use that can improve their bottom line and at the same time conserve nutrients.
I like very much how Kristen put that, and I'm going to say the same things, and like just in two different ways, I think. So if you talk to a farmer about their nutrient management practices, they will tell you that they are not going to apply fertilizer that they don't need to. They are not going to expend, input costs that they don't see as necessary to their operation. So I think, just from a business standpoint, that's not a very responsible business practice. So, where we can kind of step in and connect them with people that can help fine tune those practices, I think is where we have a lot of potential. And then I think the other side of that, Kristen, I like how you talked about the footprint. I think that this would be a lot easier if farmers were not farming in an open environmental system and could control everything from weather and things like that, So Kristen mentioned that people are farming or managing for an average yield, kind of not knowing what the weather conditions look like when they're coming up. If they're going to get a heavy rain, that's going to impact the fertilizer that they've already applied, or alternatively a drought that is going to impact yield so that crops aren't taking up what they had applied. So it would be easy to manage perfectly in not outdoor environmental conditions, but they're making kind of the best assessments that they can, given that uncertainty.
And if we could spoon feed crops like the exact amount of nitrogen they need to grow that week at optimal growth, that would be ideal. But farmers are getting closer to that by doing things like splitting their fertilizer applications so that they're not putting it all up front, where it's just sitting there at risk for volatilizing to the air or running off to the groundwater or surface water. So I met a farmer like 10 years ago on the Eastern Shore who was like, I triple split apply my nitrogen. And this was like, I'm just doing this. I don't know if he's getting any money for that or if we're counting that but that's a common practice that you don't put all your eggs in one fertilizer application basket.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that's different here, worth pointing out. They in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, our management practices are already different than a lot of areas, in the Midwest and outside the watershed, partly because of our landscapes here, our soils are different and things like that. But we honestly can't get away with some of the practices that they use elsewhere in the country because you can't apply all your nitrogen in the fall, say, and expect it to still be there in the spring. So we do split applications and have for a long time. And then you have some farmers, if they're running irrigation systems, that they are spoon feeding through the season because they can apply, that's an opportunity where they can apply that nitrogen throughout the season, which is pretty cool.
Great. Thank you both for your feedback, especially the opening comments about, how we talk about it and the importance and sort of reframing that conversation so we're actually depicting what's going on. Really appreciate that. The next question is coming from the chat, and it says, in thinking about nutrient applications, when were the land grant university fertilizer recommendations updated, and do those recommendations take into account climate change and new seed varieties, if either of you have any insight into that?
I don't have exact dates, but I know in Virginia it was not long ago, and it was done through field trials across the state that would have been looking at new genetics. But it is, I will speak for our land grant university friends. It is a really critical job to keep those updated, and also something that's a little bit hard to fund because it's not new, it's not exciting. However, what is looking really exciting is this new work looking at integrating soil organic matter and then cover crop nitrogen components into the nutrient management plan so that we can fine tune nitrogen that way, as well as, Jen, you mentioned the precision agriculture out there. Almost every new combine comes with precision technology. So we're getting a better sense at like what areas of the fields are yielding well, what areas of the fields are we losing money on every year, and trying to help farmers utilize all that great information is, of course, a major challenge.
I agree with that research being kind of underfunded in relevance in relation to its importance. I think it's been some time since, at least in my area, since those application rates were kind of like looked at holistically and overhauled. I know that they have made kind of tweaks here and there over the years, to nitrogen rates and things like that. So it's something that I think, though, is an important issue. If somebody had funding, I think that our university extensions would be more than happy to take that up and kind of take a longer look at that.
Great, thank you. What efforts are underway to increase farmer education on soil biology? So much education has been focused on physical and chemical properties, but soil biology is the base of the pyramid for nutrient cycling and regenerating soils.
That is such an exciting topic. June before last, we had a historic drought here in Virginia, and corn crops were young. And I learned from one of my agribusiness partners, Virginia Seed Company's Tim Woodward, that the role of mycelium in helping young plants access both nutrients and tiny pore water that the plant roots themselves can't even extract from the soil. Like these mycelium or fungal networks are basically taking care of these young plants the way we take care of our dairy cows. I mean, the young plants are exuding sugar that are feeding the mycelium, and the mycelium are feeding and watering these plants. So it is just a really fascinating topic, and I think that it's exciting. I think farmers are interested in it. Our Innovation Roundtable folks really want to understand the impacts of, herbicides and pesticides on soil microbiology, for example. And it's an area where I think science is trying to keep up. So there's some joint learning to do. There's just so much complexity in our soil. It's super exciting and also a cutting edge research area.
I know when NRCS had started with their soil health outreach, and that's been about 10 years ago, they focused on like kind of the core tenets of soil health in the interest of soil biology, protecting and improving soil biology, so keeping the soil covered and, reducing disturbance and kind of like providing a crop rotation. I can't remember what everything was now because it's been a while since I looked at it, but a lot of the soil health outreach has been focused on those tenants. And then I know in the work that we've done to provide events and things like that, maybe it's been more of an accessory effort, to bring in speakers that can kind of advise or guide into that. And in talking with farmers, like there's a wide range of people who are very interested in soil biology and people who just kind of want to know like what to do, and they're fine with somebody else kind of understanding the nuts and bolts of why it works, like the theory of vitamins, like they don't have to understand why it works. They just have to know, that it does. So.
Great, thank you. And then, so Jen, you touched on sort of the two-way nature of communication. And so how are there examples where experiences from the farmers as they've been implementing some of these practices, whether it's information regarding, the financial side, the management side, or the effectiveness side, has that information fed back into the process and aided to inform future management actions or decision making in some way? Are there any like good examples of seeing how that feedback has been applied?
Yeah, I think that it's been kind of a slow burn for a while now. In the states that I work with, that feedback has gone back through to inform state and county level programs. I think that kind of thing has been happening through farm bill programs as well. But a lot of what I see is what Kristen was talking about before, with the innovation network, with farmers talking to other farmers, seeing those changes happen on an individual level. When we've done surveys related to our soil health outreach, just kind of like having those networks, having that peer-to-peer knowledge transfer. A lot of farmers say that they have changed their management in response to what they've heard from other farmers.
Yeah, and I think another good example of that is Maryland Department of Agriculture's like Healthy Soils Plus program, where if a farmer wants to do something that's not covered by a traditional cost share, but that shows promise for improving soil health, there's like this competitive pot of funding that they can apply to and try something like that. So I think that two-way street is really important because a lot of those folks that are going to be applying to that grant could be doing things that in 5 years will be in the cost share programs. They're ahead of their times in many respects.
Great, thank you. So The next question is, can the speakers address ways to navigate forces that are out of producers' controls? A couple examples are things like profitability, trade and tariff impact on ag economic viability, and reliability of funding, such as pulling back, pausing, reducing federal funds that support the BMPs and the technical assistance. So with so much of all of that in flux, how do you navigate those continuing relationships and support the producers in light of all of that uncertainty and change?
I think that goes back a little bit in part to one of the slides that we had about having an understanding of the current conditions in farming, and just an awareness and understanding the context that farmers are making decisions in. And then the things that we have control over in our positions are the flexibility in our programs so that farmers can adapt how they need to based on those current conditions. Tariffs are definitely above my pay grade, outside my wheelhouse. And understanding, I know with the stop and start in funding with this current administration, we know that that's impacting trust with our farming community. And the conservation districts, I can speak from their side at least, that the key that they have, the kind of all they can do right now is make sure they're communicating clearly with the producers that they work with for what they can expect, what they know at any given time, and just kind of being as open as they can. It's going to impact the trust that they have in working with us, and we know that. But some of that is just kind of outside of what we can control personally.
But we also know that there's going to be economic ups and downs. Like that's a given, right? So what we have on our side here is many of the conservation practices that we're promoting make sense, even if there's no cost share. So like take something like cover crops, for example, which our states, Maryland and Virginia and Delaware, have generous cover crop programs. We're trying to communicate, like the innovative roundtable farmers that I mentioned, they're going to plant cover crops, whether they get paid for them or not, because they consider them an integral component of their operations. They are helping them, reduce herbicide resistant weeds. They're helping them weather droughts and storms. There's all kinds of benefits they're seeing. They're seeing increased yields. So when we talk about conservation practices, the ones that are the most popular are also the ones that have a potential economic impact on the farm such that the farmer would want to do them anyway. That's our sweet spot for a conservation practice, right? Like one you'd want to do anyway, even if you weren't getting paid.
Great, thank you. Are there any strategies specific to addressing impacts from increased flooding and or saltwater intrusion? So taking some of the impacts that we're seeing from, climate change work and how are they translating into some of the best management practices or other recommendations that are being offered to producers?
Kristen, do you want to start?
So we worked with a really amazing group of people about 5 years ago to look at conservation planning for just this issue. And Virginia Institute of Marine Science did some mapping to look at the risk. And it is a real concern in our area. It's going to be probably an increasingly big concern. So like a key thing that comes to mind is thinking about like phosphorus drawdown. One thing that's hard to do is get a whole new crop like produced in a region, right? So that's one thing the group looked at was like, well, could we grow something that would be, able to grow on this saltier like water? And that's a big lift, right? Because every crop produced it's not just the farm infrastructure, it's the community infrastructure that supports that storage and handling and sale of and marketing of that crop. So integrating, I think, that risk into our conservation planning tools is going to be really important. I also just want to point out that those flatlands are really important for marsh migration. So, thinking about like how can we help transition that land so that it is at some point in the future thriving habitat? Like one thing that comes to mind is that phosphorus could be a problem, because we have all of our phosphorus, and any phosphorus in soil bound to iron oxide is going to release when the soil gets saturated, because it's just the iron is going to reduce, the phosphorus is going to become available. So that's thinking about looking at that soil phosphorus is probably from an environmental perspective and rewarding farmers financially through cost share programs for drawing down that phosphorus in fields that we know are going to be wet or that are becoming wet, I think is important.
We had done a similar project in Delaware with mapping to identify, vulnerable parcels. And the district here in Sussex County reached out to farmers that were potentially affected to see if they were interested in working with us to identify some alternative solutions. So they had a pretty good return on that. I think they were seeking to write conservation plans for 1,000 acres. They got interest for more like 3,600 acres, which was great. Maybe not great because it means that we have that many vulnerable parcels, but they were interested in working with the district for either alternative crops, say switchgrass or sorghum is a little more salt tolerant, or depending on the situation, kind of converting that land to some kind of habitat reclamation or something like that.
Great, thank you. And so you mentioned, getting feedback from the farmers and finding out, what they want, what their preferences are, what they're looking for. So this is sort of a fun twist on that. And that's how do we recognize the efforts and the successes and the results that we're seeing as a result of, the farmers implementing these practices and being good stewards and partners with us in this. So are there things that are your go-tos when you want to have some recognition and celebration of success?
I love that question. Because I think that's really important, that how much farmers have accomplished or how much work they've done already kind of leading up to this point. So one that I like to use a lot is that farmers in our area, in our region, plant about 5 times the acreage of cover crops, at least from what we know, as farmers from the Midwest. Like we've done a really good job at kind of working with farmers, letting them share information with each other. To Kristen's point about it's kind of coming into a sweet spot where a lot of farmers would plant cover crops in absence of cost share. Those investments have certainly been important, but that message is getting through. So that's one of my favorites. But I think that celebrating those wins, and I know the Ag Advisory Committee has talked about this too, that it's really important for messaging and just kind of recognizing where we're at to have that as part of the story as well.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I love things like the Aldo Leopold Conservation Award that really recognizes farmers. And Jen, you've been really helpful in bringing that to farmers in Maryland, and it's in Pennsylvania now too. There's conservation districts have like Clean Water Farm Awards here in Virginia. And honestly, this is something we all can do a better job of because, I'm coming from the environmental side. I'm interested in nutrient and sediment loading to the Chesapeake Bay, but I've really integrated in my language when I talk to non-farmers about farmers and farmers that we have some of the most conservation-minded farmers in the world here in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And we're feeding a lot of people with, limited farmland, but, there is a footprint to that. And also we have done so much. So I think that hand in hand with the conversation of, well, gosh, we need to do more. We need to be better is the conversation of, our farmers are some of the best farmers in the world when it comes to water quality.
Great, thank you. And before we wrap up our time today, I want to offer you, Jen and Kristen, just the opportunity to share any final thoughts on the subject. We've had a really robust conversation, but if there's anything else you want to leave with our attendees, I'd like to give you the opportunity to do so.
I've been watching the chat and can't keep up with it because there's been so much going on that's it's incredible. And I'll have to see if I can capture it and go back and look at it later or something like that. So I think the thing that I would like to leave is that two-way street. So, obviously this call, this webinar is kind of about working with ag communities. But I think that opportunity is there. I'd open that up to anybody here and just appreciate that everybody, there's a lot of folks on this call, a lot of different stakeholders and organizations that are working with each other. And I think that that connectivity and communication is vital. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to talk a little bit today and to hear from you all as well.
And I'll just close by saying that it's just no free lunch, right? Like every decision that we make on a farm has like a plus side and a negative side. And a perfect example of that is no-till. We have done so much amazing work with no-till in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Our adoption rates for no-till are some of the highest in the country here. But there's a drawback to that, right? We're not tilling in our manure, so all that phosphorus is sitting on the surface, subject to runoff. Many farmers are using herbicides so that they can knock down their cover crops without tillage. Tillage is our traditional weed control mechanism. You get out there and till twice a year before every plant, maybe more than twice a year. So like there's just no free lunch. And I don't like it's just hard to find a system that's like entirely perfect. So let's just continue to do better and do our best. And there's just so much research to be done in this area. I mean, I feel like it's amazingly complex how our soil and our agricultural ecosystems are. And there's just I'm always amazed at how little I know and how much there is to learn.
Great. Well, thank you again, Kristen and Jen, for joining us today and just sharing all of your work and wisdom with us. We really appreciate your time, and thank you to all of our participants for joining us and engaging in the conversation. Jen was right. The chat has been so busy sharing resources. We will capture all of those as well as any questions that weren't answered from the chat or submitted ahead of time. Try to get as much information back out to you in our follow-up email. Please, if you are interested in continuing on this roundtable journey with us, we've got another one scheduled for December 17th, and it's going to be a fun one for the end of the year, a little holiday gift for all of our participants. So we're very much looking forward to that. Thank you again for all of your feedback and time, and we'll see you on the next one.